The whisper in the office. I never liked working late. The silence of the empty office always made me uneasy, but I had no choice. The deadline was looming, and I was way behind. The place, usually alive with ringing phones and chattering colleagues, now felt like a ghost town. The only sounds were the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of the building settling. My name is Tom, and I work as a graphic designer. It was Friday night. And I was completely alone. I watched my last colleague leave, envying his freedom. I took a deep breath, turned back to my computer, and tried to focus. As the hours passed, the world outside my window faded into pitch-black darkness. The only illumination came from my computer screen and a dim desk lamp. A shiver ran down my spine. I told myself it was just my imagination. Around midnight, I decided to take a break. I stood up, stretching stiff muscles, and headed toward the break room for some coffee. The hallway was dark, my footsteps echoing eerily on the tiled floor. I flipped the switch, and the fluorescent lights flickered to life, casting a harsh, cold glow. I poured myself a cup of coffee, leaned against the counter, and took a sip. The warmth was comforting. Then, a noise. Faint. Almost like a whisper. I paused, straining to listen. Nothing. Just the hum of the vending machine and the distant sounds of the city outside. I chuckled nervously. "You're losing it, Tom," I muttered. Finishing my coffee, I walked back to my desk. But the uneasy feeling lingered. Like I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder. No one was there. Then, when I reached my desk, something was wrong. My computer screen was black. I jiggled the mouse. Nothing. I frowned, trying to turn it back on. Dead. Frustrated, I checked the power cable. It had been unplugged. My blood ran cold. I knew I hadn't touched it. My hands trembled as I plugged it back in and powered it on. The screen flickered back to life. I let out a relieved sigh. But then, a message popped up. "Get out." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This had to be a prank. But who? Everyone had left hours ago. I scanned the empty office, half expecting someone to jump out and laugh. But there was no one. I decided to ignore it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was imagining things. I forced myself to focus, opening my project file. But the dread wouldn't fade. I kept glancing at the clock, waiting for the night to end. Then. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. The footsteps stopped. I took a deep breath and walked toward the corridor, my steps cautious. The hallway was empty. Just as it had been before. I scanned the office one more time, just to be sure. Then I saw it. One of the conference room doors was slightly ajar. My stomach twisted. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. With a deep breath, I pushed it open. Darkness. The only light was the faint glow from the hallway behind me. I stepped inside, eyes adjusting to the shadows. Then. Slam. The door shut behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. I grabbed the doorknob, it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Panic surged through me. I pounded on the door. Help. Silence. Then. The whisper. This time, it was right behind me. I could feel the breath on my neck. I turned slowly. My eyes wide with terror. A shadow moved. A figure stood in the corner. Watching. Waiting. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The figure didn't move. Didn't speak. I fumbled for my phone, my hands trembling so badly that I almost dropped it. I turned on the flashlight. The beam landed on a mannequin. Dusty. Old. Its glassy eyes stared blankly ahead. I let out a shaky laugh. Just a mannequin, I whispered. A joke. Someone's sick prank. But then, the whisper came again. This time, it was clear. Get out. My blood turned to ice. The mannequin hadn't moved. But the voice had been right next to my ear. I didn't wait. I yanked the door open, bolting down the hallway. I grabbed my bag, my keys, and sprinted for the exit. I didn't look back. Didn't care what I left behind. I burst into the cool night air, gasping for breath. I never went back to that office at night again. I finished my project from home. No deadline was worth the terror I felt that night. To this day, I don't know what I experienced. Maybe it was a prank. Or maybe, it was something else. Something that didn't want me there. But I will never forget. The whisper that told me to leave. The man at the window. I tried to ignore it. The strange feeling creeping into my bones. The way the house felt too quiet. It was just my imagination. I settled onto the couch with a bowl of popcorn, flipping on the TV. The light from the screen flickered, casting uneasy shadows across the walls. I was determined to enjoy my night alone. Then, a noise from the kitchen. Soft. Tap. I froze, ears straining. I paused the TV. Silence. I exhaled, shaking my head. Just the house settling, I told myself. I turned back to my show, trying to lose myself in the story. Then, the sound came again. Louder. More persistent. Not just a tap. A knock. My heart started to race. I got up slowly, every step feeling heavier. The kitchen loomed ahead, its darkness stretching beyond the faint glow of the microwave clock. I peered around the corner. Nothing. The doors were locked. The windows were shut. I let out a nervous sigh of relief. Then, I turned around. And saw him. A man. Standing outside the kitchen window. Staring right at me. Pale face. Wide, wild eyes. Scruffy beard. His clothes were dirty, tattered. My blood ran cold. I froze, unable to move. He raised his hand. And tapped on the glass. Harder this time. That snapped me out of my trance. I backed away. My mind was racing. I grabbed my phone and, with trembling fingers, dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm. "What's your emergency?" I whispered, terrified he might hear me. "There's a man outside my window. He's trying to get in." "Stay on the line," she said. "Help is on the way. Can you lock yourself in a room?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yes." I ran upstairs, my legs shaky, and locked myself in my bedroom. I sat on the floor, back against the door, trying to stay calm. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The operator kept talking, reassuring me that the police were close. Then, a loud crash. The window. He had broken in. I held my breath. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming up the stairs. I whispered, "He's inside." The operator's voice remained steady. "Stay quiet. The police are almost there." I covered my mouth with my hand, listening. Doors creaked open one by one. He was checking every room. Then, he reached my door. The doorknob rattled. Then, banging. Harder. Faster. He was trying to break in. I pressed all my weight against the door, praying it would hold. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Then. Sirens. The banging stopped. Silence. Then. Rushed footsteps. The front door slamming shut. He was trying to escape. Moments later, voices downstairs. The police had arrived. "It's okay," the operator said. "You can open the door now." I hesitated, then slowly unlocked the door. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. I made my way downstairs, where 2 officers waited. They looked at me with concern. "Are you all right?" one asked. I nodded, still in shock. He broke in through the window," I stammered. The other officer exchanged a look with his partner. "We got him. He's in custody now. You're safe." A wave of relief washed over me. It was over. The officers stayed with me until my parents returned. Later, they told us the man was a drifter with a history of breaking into homes. He had been caught before, but always escaped. This time, they promised he wouldn't get away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face at the window. But I was grateful. Grateful that it was over. That I was safe. From that night on, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked tight. I even had an alarm system installed. The experience shook me to my core. But it taught me a valuable lesson. Always be careful. Because sometimes, when you're alone at night, you might not be alone at all. The figure in the attic. The sound was eerie, but I told myself it was nothing, just the wind. Then, I heard it again. Louder. This time, it came from upstairs. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed my phone and texted my mom. "Are you guys almost home?" I waited. No reply. I checked the time, 9:15. They wouldn't be home for another 45 minutes. I swallowed my fear. I had to be brave. Clutching my blanket like a shield, I crept toward the stairs. The wooden steps creaked beneath my feet, each sound sharp in the silence. I reached the top, listening. Silence. Taking a deep breath, I started checking the rooms. First, my parents' bedroom. I pushed the door open slowly, peeking inside. Dark. Everything looked normal. Then, my room. Again, nothing. I started to feel silly, maybe it was just the house settling. I turned to go back downstairs. Then, I heard it again. From the attic. I stopped dead in my tracks. The attic door was slightly ajar. A chill ran through me. I had always been scared of the attic, dark, full of old, forgotten things my parents had collected over the years. I never went up there. But tonight, something felt different. Like I had to check. I approached the attic door, my heart hammering. I reached out and pushed it open. The stairs leading up were steep and narrow. I hesitated. Then, the noise came again. A faint shuffling. Like someone, or something, was moving up there. I took a deep breath and climbed. Each step creaked loudly, like the house was warning me to turn back. At the top, the attic was even darker than I remembered. I fumbled for the light switch. Click. The dim bulb flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. I scanned the room. Old furniture. Dusty boxes. Cobwebs. Everything seemed normal. I exhaled, ready to leave. Then, I noticed something strange. One of the old trunks was slightly open. I knew for a fact. It had always been shut. I approached, hands trembling, and slowly lifted the lid. Inside. Nothing. Just old clothes, a few books. I let out a shaky laugh. I'm just being paranoid. Then. A sound. Right behind me. I spun around. My heart stopped. A figure stood in the shadows. Tall. Cloaked in darkness. Its face was hidden, but I could feel its eyes on me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I took a step back. The figure moved closer. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic. Then, it spoke. You shouldn't be here. Its voice was low. Cold. This is my home now. I ran. Didn't look back. I flew down the attic stairs, nearly tripping. I tore through the hallway, down the main staircase. Grabbed my phone and bolted out of the house. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the street. With shaking hands, I called my parents. When they finally answered, I told them everything. They rushed home and immediately called the police. The officers searched the entire house, including the attic. They found nothing. No sign of the figure. They told my parents it was probably my imagination, maybe too many scary movies. But I knew what I saw. And I knew. I would never forget that night. After that, I never felt safe in that house again. Because deep down, I knew. Somewhere in the shadows. That figure was still there. Watching. Waiting. Before we get into the next story, if you're here for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. Next story. The Strangers on the Road. It was a dark, stormy night. The kind where the wind howled like a ghost, and the rain poured in sheets, making it hard to see the road ahead. I was sitting in the back seat of our old, reliable car. My mom was driving. We were on our way home from visiting Grandma, and I was exhausted. My eyes felt heavy. I was just about to drift off. Screech. The car jerked to a stop. My seatbelt dug into my chest as I was thrown forward. I snapped awake. A man stood in the middle of the road. Drenched from the rain. His clothes were tattered. Dirty. His face was hidden in shadows. But I could see his eyes. Wild. Frantic. Like a cornered animal. My mom gasped, quickly locking the doors. She kept her foot on the brake, her hands gripping the steering wheel tight. We both stared at the man, unsure what to do. He looked desperate. But something about him felt wrong. My heart was pounding. Then. 3 more figures emerged from the shadows. They seemed to appear out of nowhere, like ghosts in the night. They surrounded the car. Banging on the windows. Pulling at the door handles. My mom screamed. "Lock your doors," she shouted. I fumbled with my lock, hands shaking so bad I could barely move. The men were shouting, their voices muffled by the rain and glass. I couldn't understand them. But I knew it wasn't good. One of them raised a crowbar. He swung it at the driver's side window. Crack. The glass held firm, but I saw small fractures forming. My mom's eyes went wide with fear. We didn't have much time. "Hold on tight," she whispered. Then. She slammed her foot on the gas. The car lurched forward. The man with the crowbar jumped back, barely avoiding the impact. The others scattered, shouting angrily as we sped down the road. The car skidded on the wet pavement. But my mom kept it under control. She drove as fast as she could, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. I looked back. The figures were growing smaller in the distance. My heart was still pounding. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Are you okay?" my mom asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I nodded, but I couldn't speak. She reached back, squeezing my hand. Her grip was strong, but trembling. "We're safe now," she whispered. "It's okay. We're safe." But I wasn't so sure. Because something told me. Those men weren't just looking for a ride. The rain began to ease, and the storm slowly drifted away. The sky remained dark, but the distant glow of streetlights became visible, offering a small sense of relief. As the tension in my body started to fade, I let out a quiet breath. When we finally pulled into our driveway, my mom shut off the engine and turned to me, her expression serious. "Always lock your doors," she said firmly. "No matter where you are or how safe it seems, always lock them." I nodded, fully grasping the weight of her words. That night had been a chilling reminder of how fast things could spiral out of control. It was a lesson neither of us would ever forget. As we stepped into the house, my mom wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. The warmth of home surrounded us like a protective shield, offering comfort after the fear we had faced. We didn't talk much about what had happened, but the memory lingered. It was a sobering lesson, to always be cautious, to stay aware of our surroundings, and to never take safety for granted. We had learned it the hard way, but it was one that would keep us safe moving forward. My name is Sarah, and I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of town. It's a cozy place, nestled among towering trees that sway gently in the breeze. I've always loved the quiet, but lately, something has felt off. At first, it was small things, food disappearing, a window left open when I was certain I had shut it. I chalked it up to forgetfulness. Then, one night as I lay in bed, I heard it, a faint noise above me. Light, hesitant footsteps creaked across the attic floor. My pulse quickened as I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling. Or maybe a raccoon. But the next morning, I found more signs. An empty can of beans on the counter I hadn't touched. Crumbs scattered on the floor. And worst of all, the attic door, slightly ajar. Summoning my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the attic stairs. Dust swirled in the dim beam of light, and as I reached the top, my breath caught. A makeshift bed, pieced together from old blankets. Empty food cans stacked in a corner. Someone had been living up here. A mix of fear and curiosity gripped me. Who was it? And why my house? That night, I stayed awake, listening. Just past midnight, I heard movement again. I tiptoed to the kitchen and waited, heart hammering in my chest. Moments later, a figure emerged from the attic. A man, thin, disheveled, exhaustion etched into his face. His eyes widened when he saw me, his entire body tensing. "Please," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Don't call the police. I have nowhere else to go." His desperation was palpable. I should have felt afraid, but instead, something inside me softened. "I'm not calling the police," I said, steadying my voice. "But I need to know why you're here." His name was Jack. He had lost everything, his job, his home, and had been living on the streets. One freezing night, he found my attic and started sneaking in for shelter and food. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't let him stay, but I couldn't just throw him out, either. So, I made a decision. I offered him a hot meal. As we sat at the kitchen table, he shared his story, his struggles, his dreams, how everything had fallen apart. I listened, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a connection. The next day, I took Jack to a local shelter and helped him get in touch with social services. We worked on his resume, and I reached out to friends who might have job leads. Slowly, hope returned to his eyes. Days turned into weeks. Jack and I developed a routine, he'd come by for meals, and we'd practice interview skills. Little by little, his confidence grew. Then, one day, he arrived at my door with the best news: he'd gotten a job. We celebrated with dinner, and I saw something I hadn't seen before: pride in his eyes. He thanked me for believing in him when no one else did. "You deserved it," I told him, smiling. "I'm proud of you." With his new job, Jack found a small apartment. Our visits became less frequent as his life got busier, but we stayed in touch. Once a week, he'd come over for dinner, and we'd catch up like old friends. Months passed, and his life flourished. He got promoted, made new friends, and even started volunteering at the shelter where he once stayed. Seeing him rebuild his life filled me with joy. One evening, he invited me to his new apartment for dinner. As I walked in, I noticed a framed photo on his wall, of the two of us, from one of our dinners. "You changed my life, Sarah," he said softly. "I don't know where I'd be without you." Tears stung my eyes as I pulled him into a hug. "You changed mine too, Jack," I whispered. "You reminded me how powerful kindness can be." From that day on, our friendship remained unbreakable. What began as a moment of fear had turned into something unexpected and beautiful. And as I sat in my little house on the edge of town, I no longer felt alone. It was filled with memories of a bond that had grown from the most unlikely of places. The rain finally eased, and the storm drifted away. The sky remained heavy with darkness, but in the distance, the dim glow of streetlights cut through the gloom. A bit of tension left my body, and for the first time in hours, I allowed myself to breathe. As we pulled into the driveway, my mom shut off the engine and turned to me with a serious look. "Always lock your doors," she said. "No matter where you are or how safe it seems, always lock them." I nodded, understanding the weight of her words. That night had been a chilling reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. It was a lesson neither of us would ever forget. Inside, my mom wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close. The warmth of home surrounded us like a shield, safe and familiar. We didn't talk much about what had happened, but the memory lingered. It was a hard-learned lesson, one that would stay with me forever. Next story. I heard the faint creak of the attic above me and smiled, remembering how it all began. I had pulled into a rundown motel on Watt Avenue in Sacramento late one evening, exhausted from a long day on the road. It looked just as shabby as the reviews had warned, but it was cheap, and I was too tired to care. I checked in, took my room key, and dragged my suitcase to room 12, hoping for even a few hours of sleep. The room was worse than I had expected. The wallpaper peeled in strips, and a musty, damp smell hung in the air. The bed, with its sagging mattress and threadbare sheets, was anything but inviting. I let out a sigh and sat on the edge, feeling the springs groan beneath my weight. Then I felt it, an itch on my arm. I scratched absent-mindedly, but a second later, another itch on my leg. My stomach twisted as I looked down and saw tiny reddish-brown bugs crawling across the bedspread. Bed bugs. Just my luck. There was no way I could sleep in that bed now. I glanced around the room for an alternative and settled on the small, grimy bathroom. The bathtub, though not exactly clean, was still better than sharing a bed with bugs. I grabbed a blanket from my suitcase, laid it out in the tub, and curled up inside. It was uncomfortable, the cold porcelain digging into my back, but exhaustion won out, and eventually, I drifted into an uneasy sleep. Sometime in the night, I woke with a jolt. Something had disturbed me. I held my breath, straining to hear. A rustling noise. My heart pounded. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe a rat scurrying through the walls. I tried to brush it off. But then, another noise. A quiet thud, like someone bumping into furniture. Someone was in my room. Fear shot through me like ice water. I reached for the only weapon I had, my pocket knife. My hands trembled as I unfolded the blade, gripping it tightly. I climbed out of the tub as quietly as possible, creeping toward the door. Through a tiny crack, I could just make out a shadow moving near my suitcase. My blood ran cold. I had to do something, but I was paralyzed. Swallowing my fear, I pushed the door open and stepped into the room. "Who's there?" I demanded, forcing my voice to sound steadier than I felt. The figure stiffened and turned. A man, tall, gaunt, with wild eyes and a scruffy beard. He looked just as startled as I was. We stood frozen, neither of us moving. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said, his voice hoarse. "I thought this room was empty." I tightened my grip on the knife. "What are you doing here?" He lifted his hands in a placating gesture. "I was just looking for a place to sleep. The window was unlocked, and I figured no one was here. I didn't take anything, I swear." I wanted to believe him, but my pulse was still racing. He didn't seem violent, but I couldn't be sure. "You need to leave," I said firmly, hoping he couldn't hear the fear in my voice. The man nodded slowly. "Okay. I'll go." He took a step toward the door but hesitated, glancing back at me. "You should lock your window," he murmured. "It's not safe around here." And then he was gone, slipping into the night. I wasted no time locking the door and wedging a chair under the handle. My heart still pounded, adrenaline making my hands shake. I sank onto the floor, my back pressed against the wall, trying to process what had just happened. I had come dangerously close to something that could have gone horribly wrong. I wasn't staying here a second longer. I packed my things in record time, double-checking the room to make sure I hadn't left anything behind. The itching on my arm reminded me of the bed bugs, and I shuddered. As I stepped outside, the sky had begun to lighten with the first hints of dawn. I locked my car door, twice, before heading to the nearest diner. I needed coffee. A strong cup, and some time to calm my nerves. Sitting in the warmth of the diner, surrounded by the hum of early morning chatter, I reflected on the night. It had been terrifying, but I had made it through. And I would never, ever leave my window unlocked again. Next story. When I was a kid, my parents bought an old house in the middle of nowhere. They said it was a great deal, a fresh start for our family. We didn't know its history. Didn't know what it would do to us. The house was beautiful in its own way, tall, proud, standing alone with trees pressing close around it. It had big windows and a wide porch. But something felt wrong. The air was always cold, even in summer. Strange noises echoed at night. Sometimes, when I was alone, I heard whispers. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination. My parents were happy in the beginning. They worked hard to turn the house into a home. Dad painted the walls bright colors. Mom filled the rooms with flowers. They laughed and sang as they worked. But soon, the laughter faded. The house drained the joy from them. They started arguing over small things. My dad's health declined, though the doctors could never find anything wrong. And then, one night, I woke to the sound of footsteps. I crept out of bed and saw my mom standing at the top of the stairs, staring into the darkness. Her eyes were empty. Like she wasn't really there. I called her name, but she didn't respond. Then, without a word, she turned and walked back to her room. The next morning, she didn't remember a thing. And things only got worse. Dad's illness grew. He was in constant pain. Couldn't work. Could barely get out of bed. And the whispers never stopped. The exhaustion in Mom's eyes deepened each day. She barely slept, haunted by strange dreams she wouldn't talk about. I wanted to help, but I was just a kid, I didn't understand what was happening. One evening, while searching the attic, I stumbled upon an old book. Dust coated its worn leather cover, and its pages had yellowed with age. As I flipped through it, I realized it told the story of our house. It had been built over a century ago by a man named Jonathan Crane, a wealthy but cruel man who mistreated everyone, including his own family. His wife, Mary, had been found dead inside the house. Some said he had cursed her. After that, every family who lived there suffered misfortune, fires, accidents, unexplained deaths. I rushed to show the book to my mother, but she brushed it off. "It's just an old story," she insisted. When I suggested burning it, she threw it into the fireplace herself. But no matter how long it sat in the flames, it wouldn't burn. That night, the house changed. Doors slammed shut on their own, windows shattered without warning, and the very walls seemed to tremble as if in rage. It was as though the house had been disturbed, angered. Dad died not long after. His death was sudden, with no clear cause. Doctors were baffled, unable to explain what had happened. Mom was devastated. She fell into a deep depression, barely eating, barely speaking. It was as if the house had drained the life from her, just as it had done to so many others before us. Eventually, she, too, passed away. And I was left alone. I moved away as soon as I could, but the house never truly let me go. It haunted my dreams, its shadow stretching into every corner of my mind. I kept thinking about the families it had claimed. I knew it wasn't over. The curse would continue, waiting for its next victims. Years passed, and a new family moved in. I prayed they would be different, that they would somehow escape the cycle. But deep down, I knew better. A young couple full of hope lost their child in a freak accident. A single man moved in next. He vanished without a trace. Priests came. Shamans. Paranormal investigators. Each one tried to break the curse. None succeeded. The house refused to let go. Now, as an adult, I sometimes drive past it. It still stands tall, its walls worn but unwavering. The families change, but the tragedy remains. The house feeds on sorrow, and I fear for the people inside. I want to destroy it. To burn it down and end its reign of misery. But what if it doesn't work? What if the curse only grows stronger? I don't know what to do. A new family has just moved in. They look happy, hopeful. Just like we once did. I can't let the house claim them too. I have to find a way to stop it. One evening, I gather my courage and drive back. Standing before its looming frame, I feel the house watching me, its presence heavy, suffocating. I take a deep breath and step inside. The door creaks open, welcoming me back. The air is thick with something unseen, sadness, anger, something worse. The whispers start immediately. I don't know how I'll stop this. But I have to try. For my parents. For the others. For the new family inside. The house has taken so much. It won't take any more. Not if I can help it. Next story. I took the night shift as a security guard because I needed the money. It wasn't my first choice, but it paid well, and I figured it would be an easy job. My name is John, and this is the story of the worst night of my life. The building was an old, abandoned factory, huge and empty. My job was simple: walk through it every hour, check each room, and write down that nothing was wrong. I started at 10 p.m. and finished at 6 a.m. The first few nights were quiet. I brought a book, drank coffee, and enjoyed the silence. It gave me time to think. But on the fourth night, things changed. I arrived at 9:45 p.m., just as Bill, the day guard, was finishing up. He was an old man who had worked there for years. Before leaving, he gave me a warning. "This place is old," he said. "It creaks and groans. Don't let it scare you. I laughed. I'm not afraid of a few noises. At 10 p.m. I started my first round. The building was dark, and my flashlight sent long, shifting shadows across the walls. I checked the doors and windows, everything was fine. At 11 p.m., I heard something. A whisper. I stopped, listening. The whispering stopped too. I shook my head. Just the wind. At midnight, I was in the basement. The worst part of the building. It was damp and smelled like mold. Then I heard it again. The whispering. Louder this time. It was coming from the dark corner of the room. Who's there? I called, my voice echoing. Silence. I shone my flashlight into the corner. Nothing. A chill ran down my spine. I hurried through my check and got out of there. At 1 a.m., I was back in the main hall when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. No one was there. My pulse raced. At 2 a.m., I retreated to the security office for a break. The office was small, with a desk, a chair, and a few monitors showing different parts of the building. I stared at the screens, hoping to see something, anything, that could explain the noises. Everything looked normal. At 3 a.m., I had to go back out. I forced myself to walk the halls, but the whispering followed me, growing louder. I felt something cold on my neck. I spun around. Nothing. I rushed through my check and went back to the office. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. I needed this job. At 4 a.m., I saw it. On the monitor, in one of the rooms. A figure. Tall. Dark. Motionless. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed my flashlight and ran to the room. Empty. There was no one there. I checked every corner. Nothing. Back in the office, I stared at the monitors. The figure was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light. At 5 a.m., exhaustion weighed on me. I just needed the night to end. One last round. As I walked, I felt it, something behind me. Watching me. I turned. No one. The basement. Again. The whispering rose to a deafening level, surrounding me, pressing in. Then. A hand on my shoulder. I spun around. No one was there. I ran. At 6 a.m., Bill arrived for his shift. He took one look at me and asked, "What happened?" I told him everything. He just nodded. "You're not the first." He glanced at the building. "They say a worker died here years ago. Never left. That was it. I quit that morning. I never went back. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear the whispering. And I wake up, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. I will never forget that night."